Hello, everybody. I am live with Alex Kain,
Hello.
writer extraordinaire, games, comics, everything, you name it, and also lots of witty retorts using words that I do not understand. So
Ah,
we're gonna get a lot of it.
ah.
We're gonna get a lot of that, no doubt. So this is a lot of fun. I've been meaning to connect with Alex for quite a while now. I met Alex initially just through the Kickstarter campaign for Yuka, of which
Mhm.
Alex was a generous backer. And so I'm very pleased to get a chance to talk with him today because Alex has worked on a lot of really cool things. And uh, uh, some of the stuff that I've played game wise, and some I haven't, but I know
Mhm.
is extremely popular. And so he must be doing something right. So
Ah.
I'm very excited to check out Alex's book, Beyond the Western Deep, which is it? Have you talked about future plans with Beyond the Western Deep?
I mean, aside from the fact that we've got a lot of story that we need to tell,
We could say
we
there's more coming.
yes, absolutely.
Lots more coming. Can we say that?
Yes,
Yeah.
what we're already thinking about Kickstarter number two. That's going to happen at some point, hopefully in the next year, and we'll see what happens. We're delivering the rewards for the first Kickstarter now, and those are starting to go out. So
Perfect.
a
Oh,
lot to do.
well, that's very excited. So you must be having a blast now because you're fulfilling rewards. I hear that's quite an easy process with no challenges.
Hey, it's real easy if you have someone else do it for you. So, so we partnered with this company in East Hampton, Mass, called Make That Thing, and they've been fantastic. They handled all of the storage and all of the sourcing for all the different vendors. And now they're packing and shipping all our stuff to all of our backers, both through Kickstarter and through people who pledged or on BackerKit after the Kickstarter ended.
Awesome, awesome. Which is currently up and running, and I do want to get a link in the chat. Let's put that up here so that people can find it. If maybe you can type that in if you have it accessible.
Me have my store link accessible? That's
Yeah, that's
preposterous.
that's a fair idea. Now, I do highly recommend people check it out. But before we get into Beyond the Western Deep, because there is a lot to talk about beyond that, eh? All right, all right, all right. There's only one person to laugh, but 100% of people who are with me right now laugh. So I'm going to take that as a compliment. So, Alex, could you talk a little bit about your history and kind of how you got into what you're doing?
Yeah. So I started working in the game development industry in 2007. I was working on mobile phone games, and if you're familiar with your tech, you'll know that the App Store for iPhones didn't go live until 2008. So what were we doing, making mobile games in 2007? Well, in the dark ages of technology, there were uh, mobile phones that you could like open like a clamshell almost, that ran archaic software that wasn't meant to play games, and we made games for that. So I made something like 20 versions of Monopoly as a game designer. And I was an associate game designer for many years at a company called Venom Entertainment. We did a game called Ninja Town for the Nintendo DS back in 2008, and we did a version of Road Rash that was kind of like an RPG kind of sort of thing.
Oh, neat.
Uh,
Road Rash of the Sega fame.
yes, it
Hmm.
wasn't quite like the Sega one. It was on phones, but it was cool. Like getting to work with a couple of these different IPs, and getting to flex my writing muscles a little bit. I wasn't actually hired as a writer. I was hired as a designer, and that's what I did for really the first like 10 years of my career
Hmm.
was a game designer. But over time, uh, because we were such a small studio, I would start helping out with the writing here and there. Mobile phone games weren't really known for their stories, and so there wasn't really a lot of oversight when I would write stuff, and so I got to really sort of experiment and play around with things.
Oh, that's the
Um,
best.
it was pretty cool. It was a lot of fun, and around 2009 or so, I started working on a game called Space Miner: Space or Bust, which was pretty great. It was like an asteroids RPG with like a funny story about, your crazy uncle who runs an asteroid mining operation in outer space, and the bank takes over his asteroid field, and you have to blow up asteroids to collect ore and use the ore to upgrade your ships and weapons and stuff. It was a lot of fun. It was a really good game, and when I helped write that game with my boss, a guy named Brandon Curiel. We just sort of poured ourselves into it. It was really, just we were making it for ourselves, and it was through that that I met a guy named Dean Dodrell, who is an animator, game developer extraordinaire, who's really a jack of all trades, who's working on a game called Dust and Elysian Tale. I sort of pinged him on Twitter, told him I was interested in the game and the stuff that he was doing. It looked like this gorgeous hand-drawn 2D game that I'd never really seen before. It looked like like a Don Bluth movie or something. And over time, we just sort of became friends online, and over time I was able to sort of ingratiate myself into the development process for that, and ultimately ended up helping him as a co-writer on that game and helping to sort of shape the story for that. And a lot of people now, when I talk about the stuff that I do, they know me as the co-writer of Dust and Elysian Tale, which is pretty cool. But that was just like a side project that I was doing in my spare time while I was working at Venom and a couple other studios in the interim, working on mobile games or Facebook games or social games. We had a game on the Windows 8 store, which sold some copies, I'm told. And yeah, it was cool. So that was kind of the start of it. Made a really cool iPhone, iPad game, and talked to an indie developer, and that sort of built up my indie cred a little bit, and I was able to start working on more indie games after that. Yeah.
And now you're with ArenaNet.
Yeah. So I was working a contract gig after Venom, unfortunately, had to lay off some staff. And it was a company called DNA West, and I was working on a mobile RPG. It was pretty great. And then it just closed one day, shuttered its doors. I distinctly remember I got a call from I got an email on LinkedIn from an EA mobile recruiter in the morning, and they were like, "Hey, we heard about what happened at DNA West."
But you didn't hear about it yet.
No, I was like, "What happened to DNA West? That sounds ominous." Yeah, and very shortly after that, this guy Bobby Stein, who was at the time the interim narrative director at ArenaNet, had posted a thing on Facebook, just sort of putting a call out for any narrative designers to apply for this position at their Bellevue office to work on the Guild Wars 2 IP. So I applied just on a whim, and it was a very speedy sort of process. They were looking for people who had experience not just in games but in other media as well. And I had worked in comics a little bit. I worked on a short story with a friend of mine, this great artist named Sean Rubin, who just released a book this past year called Bolivar. It's really great. He and I worked on that's
the dinosaur.
The dinosaur, the dinosaur living in New York because it's the busiest place in the world.
What a neat book!
It's great. So he was working. That was like a passion project of his for years. You can
tell.
Yeah. He was working on it when I first started talking to him, just like it was an idea in his head. It's a positively just brilliant, all ages, sort of a cross between a graphic novel and a children's book. It's absolutely gorgeous. But before he was working on that, we did a short story for Mouse Guard: Legends of the Guard, Volume 1, which David Peterson, incredibly gracious, letting us tell stories in his universe. We wrote this 10-page story, and the book won an Eisner Award for Best Anthology that year. That's so it was awesome, and it was like the very first comic that either of us had ever released. So it was not. It was very strange, but Yeah, so I had some experience working in comics. Working in comics is a lot like working in mobile games. I feel like the constraints are kind of similar. We can talk a little bit about that maybe later when we get into actual process stuff.
Hmm.
But and then I started working on a webcomic around the same time called Beyond the Western Deep, which is now, we're several hundred pages in, and we're almost done with volume 3 right now. We're releasing it pretty much every week online at westerndeep.net. And I'm still doing that. I'm still working on that constantly. So,
Right, right.
yeah.
It's funny, when I first checked out Beyond the Western Deep and I started to read, and I thought, this feels like something that's just gonna go. It has This is not gonna be a quick story.
No.
No.
We were inspired by Brian Jake's Redwall books a lot. Don Bluth movies, of course, huge inspirations. But the thing that Rachel Bennett, the artist on Western Deep, and I we'd grown up reading these books, and the stories always, felt like they could have gone a little deeper. They were obviously written for kids. So you know, when you get past that sort of that age range that you're normally reading them, what are you going to read? Like, what's in that gap? There are now more books in that gap than there were back when we started thinking about Western Deep. But we wanted to sort of take the things that we liked about fiction for that was in that next sort of age range, what is now called all ages work, which appeals to a much wider range of individuals in different age brackets, and tells more complex stories, and the characters are more complex, and the themes are more interesting. There's maybe like a little bit. It harkens back to those like 80s. I think that's why like the Bluth movie stuff sort of factors in, because those were like a little darker than what you were getting at the time. The stories were a little more nuanced, a little more complex, except for Rockadoodle. I don't know what was going on there, but sort of pulling that into that sort of animals with swords fantasy that we call. Has been interesting, and it's led to this very complex story that when we pitch it at comic conventions, and we have like 2 seconds to tell people what it is, we say it's like Zootopia meets Game of Thrones for all ages, and people immediately know what it is, which is pretty cool. But it also means it's very long, and it's going to go for a while. So
Right, right. Yeah. Hmm. And it's neat to know that that's going to be something that you're in for the long haul. Is Rachel on board for the whole way?
she's been a trooper. I mean, it's been God, hang on. I need to actually go to the very first page here. When did we? So we with the first post was December 13th, 2011 is when we started posting it. And we were working on it well before then. We actually put together a bunch of pitch packets for comic publishers, and I would go to New York Comic Con and pitch it to different people, and all of them would say, oh, this looks nice, but it's not really our thing, or like, do the whole first issue and then come back to us. And at the time, we didn't really have a plan to release it online, but then David Peterson, the Mouse Guard creator, suggested, like, hey, there are all these great web comics that are coming out. Lackadaisy Cats was one. Katie Cook had just started a comic called Gronk, which was great. Evan Dom started doing a comic called Vatu, which is another inspiration. But there are just all these great long form web comics that are coming out that are actually interesting, intellectually interesting, and you can actually see the artists sort of develop over time. And Rachel has done phenomenal work over the last 8 years on this thing. Yeah, she's incredibly invested in the world, in the IP, and her work just keeps getting better and better, and it's been fantastic to sort of watch her develop, same way that I've developed as a writer since I started working on it as well. Like, part of the danger of working on a long form multi-year story is that you want to George Lucas the whole thing. When you get a certain amount of time into it, you just want to go back and like change everything that you're a better writer now. Go back and improve this character arc or change these lines. We sort of did that when we printed our first self-published book in 2014. We changed a couple of the intro pages. But anyway, yeah, Rachel's been fantastic, a fantastic creative partner, and she's definitely on board, despite the fact that we know it's going to take a while to get to where we're going.
Right. Now, let me take a few steps back. What brought you into the industry as a whole? Because I know you talked about the projects that you got started with, but I'm curious how you actually got into the industry. That's always a question that people have, especially for something like writing.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I wanted to get into game development in particular since I played video games for like the very first time. My parents had a Nintendo. They bought it for themselves, which was a terrible mistake on their part because they never actually got to play it.
First time I've heard that.
Yeah. There was this cool, new electronic thing, and they got it for them because they thought it looked cool, and my mom was a huge Tetris fiend. And she and my aunt both had this sort of like Tetris rivalry that spanned generations now. Well, generation at least. I get spicy in Tetris 99. But I would play this thing constantly, and the moment that I started seeing games with more story components in them, I knew that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell stories using games, and I didn't know how to do that because at the time video games were like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, right? There wasn't an internet, there were no exposés on how this game was developed, and it was all a big mystery to me. Like I really had no idea. There were no publicly available books or anything like that. But there's something. There's a prop back there. I can see. Oh my God, what is this?
Yeah. I'm digging something out of my shelf here.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to reference something similar that I had experienced when I was younger. But do you remember what was the first sort of story-centric project that you can recall that inspired you?
It was probably Blaster Master on the Nintendo. It had these. What I discover now was a very sort of hastily arranged recontextualization of the opening cutscene for Blaster Master. I don't know if you're familiar. But yeah. So I saw this and I was like, it immediately provided context, and I was invested in what was going on, even though it was absolutely ridiculous. And I remember being really interested in what was going on because of this, 30-second long series of screenshots that had been, juxtaposed before this game that really had nothing to do with anything. And it was very cool. And I think I know where you're going with that book, because when I had a subscription to Nintendo Power, and Nintendo Power had these comics in them that they really sort of leaned into in the early 90s when the SNES started really hitting its stride.
That's what I was going to bring up. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. They had the Super Mario Brothers comics. They had the Big Nate comics, or not Big Nate, Nestor, the Nestor comics, and then they had
dude with the hair thing, right?
Yeah, he was in Pilot Wings.
Oh, that's what it reminded me of. Oh, yeah. You just made that connection make sense.
I cracked the code.
Yeah. That's been driving me nuts.
Yeah, so he was. So those were sort of the catch-all franchise where they would use him as like a guest star in different Nintendo IPs and different games. And then they had the Metroid comic that was like kind of dark and more geared toward an older audience. You had the Zelda comic, which I think I have the exact same book that you just pulled up, the whole comic run,
Right.
which is great. And then you had the Benemaro Ito Star Fox comic, which
That
uh,
one I didn't read.
yeah, so that one like completely blew me away. It was like an actual comic that I was just getting every month. It was this wonderful sort of serialized, extremely bizarre take on the Star Fox franchise, but it was pretty cool. I enjoyed that a lot. All those comics were great, super surreal. They really captured what I loved about the Nintendo games. Um, and that definitely helped contribute to the idea that you could tell stories in games, because you read those and you're a kid and you're thinking like, well, I mean, man, can you believe that someday we'll get video game stories that are like these comic stories? And now it's the circle is now complete. You have these great, you've got like the Paper Mario games that are telling great stories in Mario games. You've got Zelda, the all the Zelda games have like robust narratives now. Breath of the Wild, take it or leave it. I personally enjoyed it, but you know, um,
I love that. That's
yeah,
a yeah, it's fantastic.
like Breath of the Wild is probably my favorite Zelda game since Link to the Past.
Mm.
But as a writer, I can definitely point out the flaws and foibles in how they decided to tell that story. Uh,
Mhm.
it's very interesting though, like from like a fundamental like philosophically, how are you telling the story kind of standpoint. I love Breath of the Wild. It's a very interesting experiment in nonlinear storytelling. Um, but anyway, yeah, that was sort of how things got started. Was I started playing these games, and then I distinctly remember it was Final Fantasy two, which is actually Final Fantasy IV, but it was Final Fantasy II here in the States on the Super Nintendo, where that was the first game I played that like really had like a real story with acts and character arcs and crazy stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I just got sucked into it like nothing I'd ever seen before. And then the Super Nintendo era was just full of games like that, games where like writers were really starting to flex their muscles. And you had all these like wonderful classic Square games that were coming out, like Chrono Trigger, which is still one of my favorite games of all time. Final Fantasy VI, and yeah, it was definitely that sort of era that primed me into realizing that I could definitely figure out a way to get involved in the games industry, telling stories. Um, and it was the world building stuff that I was most interested in. So I wanted to get into game design, and I wanted to help craft that because, as it had been described to me, game designers wrote the story. They were also sort of they contributed to the scenario. The idea of a separate writer entirely was not really part of the industry at that point. Designers would build stuff and just sort of come up with the storyline while they were building it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until I started getting involved in the industry when game writing really started to come into its own as, no, you need to have a writer on your team working on the story in tandem with other specializations, with design, with art, with engineering,
Right.
with audio. So that was cool to sort of see that happen. BioWare games obviously helped that along. Games like Baldur's Gate and Planescape, obviously, early on in the PC era. Um, it was super cool to see that just sort of happen, to see that
Mhm.
that writer, that tabletop RPG DNA get sort of sucked into video games. And this, now all of a sudden everyone's interested in the lore and why this stuff happens and why this character did this one thing. And oh, what is this thing? Oh, it's thousands of years old. Where did it come from?
Mhm.
Someone's got to write that. Designers don't have time. They've got to build the game. So
Yeah, yeah, that right. Uh-huh. Yeah, and yeah, just so people know, if I can just interrupt you here, Alex, if people
yeah.
want to ask any questions, go ahead and leave them in the chat, because this is these hangouts are great because you get a chance to talk to people who are working as professionals in the industry, and if you're somebody who's whether you're trying to break into the industry or professionally yourself, or just interested in the subject, this is a great chance to get to pick the brain of somebody who is making it happen. So
Yeah.
go ahead and leave your comments, and we will get to them. But Alex, so I want to focus actually a little bit on something that I don't normally get to talk about, but the Nintendo comic system, which you brought up, is this relates? So this is something we have in common as a
Mhm.
source of inspiration. It was funny. I reference it when I talk about the Game Legends series, which is what I'm producing with Yuka being the first project of what I expect will be a lot of books. I've got right now I've got about 7 projects on the list that are all adaptation projects with no ability to do them.
One at a
um,
time, one at a time.
when Yuka's out there, this is what I was saying to Alex before we jumped on. Is I got a sample here of the basically the quality of the book that we're going to get for Yuka, and I'm blown away. So I think when people get it, they're going to be very satisfied with it, and we'll see how we can get that support to move into the next project. Hopefully, to be something that appeals to people. But as far as inspiration, source of inspiration, going back to the Nintendo comic system, which was a really cool development back in I think 1992, maybe 91.
Mhm.
But it was sort of in the late NES days, and this was something. There were a couple of things I can't find my. I was looking around behind me trying to find the actual Nintendo comic system books, but I do have the Zelda Nintendo Power and the
Yep.
Mario Adventures, both of which were broken up into Nintendo Power
Yep.
chapters. But the comic system is actually what I want to focus on. These are very cool,
Mhm.
probably my favorite examples. But the comic system that Valiant put out, the comics developer Valiant, has a really interesting backstory in itself. And if you want to learn more about what Nintendo was doing at a sort of in its heyday with the NES, and just really breaking into video games and starting to really develop characters
Mhm.
in the way that Alex has described, and trying to expand on those worlds. That's what the Nintendo comic system was. And regardless of your feelings about the comics themselves, what I remember, and Alex, you touched on this a little bit about how there was no, you couldn't gather on the internet to do this stuff. So anything that you found, like you were probably like me in this regard. If you found something that had Mario on it, I didn't care what it was. It could have been a toothbrush. I would get very excited if I went to the store and I'd be 8 years old or whatever, and
Mhm.
I'd see Mario on something. I would bother whoever I was with to throw money at buying this thing just so I could have this thing from Nintendo because it was so cool. It was Nintendo.
Yeah, yeah, now you can go into a Target or a Walmart and just there's Nintendo stuff all over the place, and you can just you can buy a Mario T-shirt. You can buy Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a pixel perfect Sonic the Hedgehog sprite on a
Mhm.
T-shirt. You can buy it for like $15.
Yes,
When
but we're old, so
yeah, we're Cro-Magnon, like basically cavemen at this point.
yep.
When we were growing up, yeah, like I remember every year you would get the Nintendo Power collector's item catalog, and it was a selection of like a dozen things, and all of them were like, oh, it's the Super Mario 64 soundtrack, or it's it's the Nintendo 64 hat. And that was the only stuff that you could find anywhere. There was no
Mhm.
game merch. Like no one was selling it at all anywhere else. Like you couldn't just go to a store and buy a Nintendo thing. That
Right.
was something that happened like many years later. Like so when we were kids, yeah, every single piece of Nintendo merch that you found was like treasure. And there was. Did you got those VHS tapes that they would send?
Of course.
Yeah. So when I was God, I was 10 years old. And the Nintendo 64 changed the system VHS rolled up on my doorstep.
The one with Ken Lobb?
Yes, the one
Yes.
with Ken Lobb.
Mhm.
Uh, so who by the way, like circling around, Facebook friends with him now, shared the video and he liked it, which
Wonderful.
to me is like the encapsulation of social media, and I don't need to be a part of it anymore. I'm
I
done.
got Ken Lobb. Ken Lobb liked my post. I'm done.
Yeah. Uh, I watched this video as a 10-year-old, and it was the even like it. Everyone will tell you now it was like the biggest marketing gimmick of all time, and like all those places were sets and not actually Nintendo corporate headquarters.
It didn't
Um,
matter.
it didn't matter because like to me it was like, this is how they make games.
Yeah.
This is how they mocapped the Mario jumping into the painting. Was they decked out a guy in like a pillow suit and they threw him against a wall. Like I didn't know any better. I was young and stupid and 10 years old. Um, and that's how I thought games were tested. Like I didn't know, like no one told me anything. Nowadays you can just you can go online and there are like free GDC talks about making games. You can download Unity and make a game in like a day. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. In fairness, when I was at Insomniac, I do remember doing animation tests where I did throw myself at a wall. So,
okay,
I guess they weren't all that inaccurate.
No, it's a partial fiction. Yeah, that's
So yeah, but with the Nintendo comic system, just to kind of wrap up that thought,
yeah.
I just find it very interesting because we sort of took mutual inspiration, but we went in different directions because so I worked in an element of story with Insomniac Games,
Mhm.
whereas my job was I was the cinematic artist, and I sort of had to bridge the gap between writing the creative side and the animators and the artists who were assembling the sets, all of which was with a focus on in-game storytelling and trying to balance with the designer's needs, as
Mhm.
well as trying to make that script work. So I think if I was working with you, I'd probably be the biggest jerk because I was the guy who had to constantly say, "Oh, you're gonna have to cut this down," and the animators can't. I got beat on a lot for that by the writer, who just
Even
loved me.
nowadays,
Oh,
even
he
now.
still sends me angry letters. Just back 10 years ago, why'd you have to say that? Why'd you have to cut that scene? We really cut out that thing that I worked so hard to write. That it was just perfect. So yeah,
Mm,
but one of the things that I found was a real challenge with the game in general is that games are interesting from a writing perspective, and obviously you can elaborate on this. In the sense that a game is really first and foremost generally about
mhm,
gameplay, unless it's a pure story based game.
mhm,
And so, uh, what I'm doing with the Game Legend series is sort of a kind of a different direction because one of the things that I did with at Insomniac was to, without getting into NDA territory, but there were things that I was experimenting with to try and more effectively do pre-visualization for cinematics that would be in game, so they would not be movies, but they'd be playable experiences. And I was working on ways to rough that out to save resources, so that
mhm.
artists weren't making these advanced sets that would get torn up and thrown out as design changed.
Right.
Instead, they would throw out my stupid scribbles, that were in 3D space and that sort of thing. But what I found that was very interesting was another totally different direction to look at was, since games are typically, at least the ones I was working on, were about gameplay first,
Mhm,
and comics are really about storytelling first. They kind of really fit together, and that's
mhm,
why I saw this sort of hole in the industry where even if you did get, and this is not to, I'm not trying to badmouth anything that was out there. It's just you didn't see an awful lot of really high quality game adaptations in comics.
mhm.
Usually, you saw the kind of quick cash ins for big titles and stuff like that that always just seemed to be part of a merch pack. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I felt that this was a big sort of gap, but it does go all the way back to the Nintendo comic system as a big source of inspiration because of how it expanded on a system that really had no true, no deep storytelling potential because the games were so basic
Mhm.
and you didn't really know what Mario's expressions looked like. You didn't, you had to imagine it while you're playing the game,
Right.
which is fun. But how cool was it to read in a panel and say, "Oh, Mario does this. This is what this character looks like when it's drawn in more
Yeah.
detail."
The idea of Mario being a character at all was, something fairly new. Same with Link. Like, you had the Super Mario Brothers Super Show on TV. That's that.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
uh, yeah. So it was definitely same with all those comics. It was cool to see characters with arcs and plot lines and development, and it was fun. Like it was cool. It really, it got the imagination going. So
Right, right,
yeah, I love the idea of extrapolating that to new games now.
right,
Uh, you
right.
know.
Now we do have a question here. Obviously, one addressed to you.
Yes.
What is Western Deep about?
Western Deep is an all ages fantasy story. It's we try to we try to tell this war story between these different fantasy races, and we wanted to try telling the story from many different sides. So it's a little Game of Thronesy in that way. But in a nutshell, you've got this kingdom that is invading another kingdom, and characters that are sort of caught up in the whirlwind that the fallout of that, and just sort of following their adventures as they try and stay alive in an increasingly hostile, politically charged universe. So
Neat,
it's
neat. That's awesome.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I did get, I haven't. This is a confession, but I haven't watched Game of Thrones. But for some reason, people are always surprised when I tell them that. But um, so I could read Beyond the Western Deep and just assume that that this is just somehow you just pulled all this fantasy.
It's never been done before. It's great. I mean, in our defense, we were writing it before either of us had read or watched Game of Thrones, or I wasn't even aware of it until I started. We were, I guess, a year or two into writing it, and someone casually sort of mentioned like, oh, it's this dark fantasy, and you got all these different, it's politics and stuff. It's like Game of Thrones, and we're like, yeah, it's like that. It's like
I
that.
guess it's like that.
I guess it is.
I heard the same thing from Scott Cirkland, who is just on with Last Night, who's got a channel called Circworks, and he has a Kickstarter project. I think it's ending probably about 5 hours, and it's called The Young and the Dead, and in it it's very, very, very similar to Stranger Things, but it was out before Stranger Things. It had sort of a band. I think it's 3. It might be 4 kids. I think it's 3 kids. No, I don't know. Anyway, but it has the same kind of 80s nostalgia thing going on, similar concepts, similar character performances and behaviors. Maybe it's what is this phenomenon that I remember hearing about where I'm sure you've experienced this, where you had an idea and suddenly it seems like a bunch of people have that idea at the same time.
Yeah, it happens a lot in comics and games. A lot. It's the sort of like there's almost like this worldwide cultural osmosis where you'll. I feel like it probably happens because there's some worldwide event or news story or something, and some people interpret it one way and some people interpret it a different way, but ultimately in like a year or two that means that the game that you're making is going to be similar to a game that someone else is making, or like now that video game engines are very good at rendering metal and neon and fog and rain, you're going to start seeing a lot of cyberpunk games.
That's interesting. So it's just maybe just the fact that there happens to be a collective interest in something at one point, and so a lot of people might just be inspired by the same concept.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's weird.
I had a concept that's top secret right now, but it's something for the future that does have a it has a vibe that when I wrote it, it was a fresh concept. But since writing it, there have been a lot of projects that have just seem to pop up all over the place. Like I left this script line around, and so someone thought, "Oh, this is not a bad idea. Let's do this." A lot of similarities, and I thought maybe it's just a coincidence. But then I thought, no, it's probably that there is a resurgence of interest in a particular genre or something that maybe we're not perceiving.
Yeah, it's a mystery. I like it's like when A Bug's Life and Ants came out at like around the exact same time.
Right, that was weird. Yeah,
that was weird.
That was weird.
Yeah.
It was also weird that some people went to actually see ants.
Yes. I mean, Sylvester Stallone draws a crowd still. I guess that's what it was. That's clearly what it was.
Okay, all right.
I think he was.
Full disclosure, I have never seen Ants, so I cannot. That's more of a running joke, but
yeah,
I'm sure it's a very fine movie.
Yeah. So yeah, So it's weird. It's a weird phenomenon, and in the case of games, it's actually kind of cool to see multiple takes on the same idea. I can definitely appreciate that. It's kind of cool when you have like an indie game that tackles a mechanic, and then you see a AAA game tackle the same mechanic, and you you try to it's cool. I like that kind of they're all inclusive. Everyone try everything. tackle it your own way sort of thing.
Yeah, because you're gonna get such a different take from a big studio than an indie studio is gonna have.
Yeah,
That's
it's neat.
so beyond the Western, one of the things that like I get really excited about projects that I know are going to go on for quite a long time. But also, as somebody who's producing physical books, I know the complexity of doing print runs. Now I know that you're
Yes.
working with a partner on this, but something that I want to note, and not that I'm trying to oversell your book, but
Hmm.
to oversell your book, because when you have a first edition like this, there's no guarantee that it's gonna, at least the same thing is gonna exist again in the future. And this is one of the things I'm trying to communicate to people about Yuka, because
Hmm.
I'm trying to get in as many orders as I can right now through the
Yep.
Backer Kit store, because the more I can get for the first run, the cheaper the cost per book is for me.
Right.
And so, because I am doing a four color press, a full press for this, and so it is important to try and get as many as you can in one print run, because what I can't do is say, once I sell out of a print run, whatever I print, if I sell out
Hmm.
of that print run, in order to sell even just one more book, I have to sell like at least 1,000 more books,
Yeah.
or I can't justify a print run. And
Yes.
so I don't know how that works with you and what you're doing, but knowing that you're planning a significant amount of additional content, this is kind of a really cool opportunity to get, especially a hardbound, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the whole point, was we wanted to do a hardbound book. We actually have variant covers too. We've got a Kickstarter limited edition and the standard cover, which I think you're doing something similar with Yuka as well.
Mhm.
You've got, yeah. So we one of the things with Make That Thing that we liked was that they were able to estimate how many books we might want to order, and I think it was somewhere on the order of like 750 books total or something like that.
Mhm.
Not it's more than our initial print run. We self-published in 2014 with a hardcover, and we did 500 copies with that, and we sold out in we used it for convention sales mostly. So that was interesting. But yeah, so like we about half of our books are Kickstarter rewards, and the other half are going to be for convention sales,
Mhm.
and maybe
Okay.
online sales. So we knew that we wanted extras
Mhm.
for that the circuit, the convention circuit. We want to start doing more shows. Those are uh, it's where we meet new fans. It's where we can talk to people in person about the book and the story. And the hardcover looks really nice when you're selling it at a convention. It really stands out, from the paperback stuff. Uh, so yeah, it's been pretty cool to see that all sort of come to life. Uh,
Right.
but yeah, figuring out that initial number was really hard, because you don't want hundreds of extra books lying around if you don't need them, and you also want to make sure that you've got enough to satisfy everyone who's going to buy one.
Right, right. And speaking of that, just in general about the concept of hardcovers. I mean, I covered this extensively during the Yuka campaign, and why I believe so strongly that it's time to move. It's time to move into higher quality, a lower production run, higher quality, because I think a lot of
Yep.
stuff. I think when everybody was screaming that the sky was falling about how everything's moving digitally,
Hmm.
they kind of made that prediction for four industries, right? They said games, movies, music, books, right?
Yep.
The only one that hasn't really done that is books, and
Hmm.
it sort of half happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually been a positive move. Because what it's doing is we're sort of eliminating a lot of the sort of junk production that was really more about just giving a an actual delivery method that we could use. So if you wanted to read a Stephen King book that was 800 pages long, you had to get, and you still, I mean, to a point, obviously they sell, but the point is you would get a big block of newsprint, that's 800 pages and
Yes.
has glue slatted on.
Oh my God. Yeah.
That's not a book that's designed to last even, but it used to be the only way that you could do it. Now you have a Kindle, and
Right.
so if you some people do of course prefer paperbacks, but the fact is you're getting a really similar experience when you have the book on Kindle. If you just want to read the story, there it is. But when you have a book that has a tactile experience involved in its overall impression that it's trying to convey to the reader,
Hmm.
having that physical book is a big deal. And this also plays into the idea that, and I think this is really a key with the younger generations, where they've grown up without real ownership over things. Everything's been digital, and if you're under 18, for example, you moved into having like a phone probably earlier than most people, and a lot of the content that you consume really is stuff you don't own. It's kind of just in the cloud.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of younger folks are looking more to higher end premium stuff for the things that they really care about, that they want to keep around. And then they're kind of cutting out the rest of it. So I have a copy here. This is a book done by the same printer that's going to be printing Yuka. And I thought I would just demonstrate something, and is why these hardcovers are so amazing if they're made a certain way. This is the kind of book nerdy stuff that no one cares about, but it does change the experience for you, the reader. But look at this. Look at how it lays flat. And it's amazing. This is what's called a Smythe sewn binding. I mean, you can bend this book, completely around, and it's a very, very durable book. Just incredible. This thing's going to last forever. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. That books just. I have this book that Viz put out for Miyazaki for Nausicaa, and it's glued. It's just It's just like a perfect bound, and it's just glued to the binding. So when you open it, you can't. You have to like pull it open really hard just to see the stuff that gets lost in the gutter. But look at that. Look at. Oh my God.
That's gorgeous.
Isn't that
that
nice?
is, yeah, that's a great.
So I'm really happy that you moved right in that direction of quality, and you're doing like a hardbound edition, because I think it's going to make a big difference. Let's take a look at one.
So this is the Kickstarter limited edition Western Deep that we did.
Hold it up so we can see the shimmer.
Yeah, you can see that.
Oh, that's
there.
Great. I'm going to turn me off here. There. Now it's just you.
Look at it's even got a little dingly dongle on the back there. Awfully nice.
Dongle.
Yeah, and you got the little one on the bottom there. That's also the foil. Spot gloss white on the front. You can't really see it on here, but that's all sort of shiny and glossy and nice. Book ribbon. Got to have the book ribbon. Can't, that's
wonderful.
It's part of the magic. But yeah, like, this doesn't have the same awesome binding that yours has, but still, it's we had the original print, and I was looking at the hardcover that we did 5 years ago, and there were just a lot of, like, the colors weren't as good, or it must have been, I don't know if it was the technology or it was like we were using the same printer this time as we did last time, but like the colors pop, the way the art is sort of centered on the screen, look at me, God, page, physical printed media, it's a gorgeous book. Rachel comes from an animation background, so really kind of these like storyboard looking, really like high energy fight scenes, and everything sort of staged.
And that is a substantial book too. That is what, 112 pages?
This is 100 and let me see, it's 106, but then we got extra stuff. We got like some front matter up here. We got some little extra sketches and art there, and we got the prologue and the forward. So those pages don't actually count, but the forward is by Sean Rubin, who wrote or illustrated the last couple of books of the Redwall book series. Actually, that was sort of how we met. I'm really happy with how this one came out, but we were
thrilling to hold it.
It is. I mean, there's really, like, you can't really beat it. Holding the product physically in your own hand. I mean, it's terrifying when you put in the order and they're like, yeah, is it, like, you sure you're okay with it? Because we're about to print like 700 of these things, and if you decide you want something changed, that's several $1,000s of stuff that you're gonna have to trash.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not quite the same, but also the page ends are black.
To
match the cover as well. So that was a cool little. So The square format, we were inspired by David Peterson's mouse guard. The square format is just great to hold in your hand. Like it really, you really feel like you're not, it's not top heavy or anything. You don't have to like hold the top or anything. You just sort of like pop it open and read it, with just one hand.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's been a trip, like releasing this thing. I mean, we signed on to a comics publisher a couple of years into working on the series, and we were publishing these paperback versions with no real extras. They were just sort of like $10, get it in stores, hit critical mass sort of books, and the sales were pretty good, but it felt weird to sell just stuff that you can get on the internet for free. And you're just sort of printing it with this paperback, right? I think the thing that you sort of tapped into was that a lot of the stuff that people are used to consuming now is digital, and it's either free or you get it through a subscription. It doesn't feel substantial.
Mm-hmm.
This hardcover feels substantial. Paperbacks don't feel substantial. Hardcover feels substantial. If you can read this for free online, why would you buy the physical version of it? It's more cumbersome to carry it around. It actually takes up space in a bag. But when it's hardcover and it looks nice and some real care was put into it, you're not really just buying the story, right? You're buying the best version of that story.
I like to use the word heirloom because
Yeah.
what you're doing is you're buying something that's just I don't like the word trophy, but it's kind of what it is in an essence, where you want to have something that you can display on your shelf that demonstrates the things that you're interested in, and
Mm-hmm.
we can eliminate, like I said, growing up, everyone I knew had too many books lying around. It was always a big mess of books,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, all that stuff over there. Yeah.
yeah, well, you can, yeah, I've
Oh
got.
yeah, and you got your ears there too. Yeah,
It's just gonna
absolutely.
fall on me one day. But um, with books, I think maybe 90% of them they could have gotten rid of and just kind of kept that 10% of really special editions. And so I thought
Mm-hmm.
better. First of all, I mean, my one of the things I'm counting on that I'm really looking forward to, and this is something that we've been finding from Doug's book, Bigfoot Bill here, is that when people get this, they're pretty stunned by what they're getting out of it. That they're
Mm-hmm.
during the campaign, it always feels during campaigns that you're paying a little bit too much for something because well, if it's priced at such a level, like with Yuka, I charge $30 for the hardcover, which I think is a
Yep.
reasonable cost for what it contains. But
Yeah.
uh, when you pay for shipping too, it's a lot to ask from a backer, really.
Yep.
If you're in the US, which has the cheapest shipping option, you're still paying $40. And so it's a lot to ask, and why I'm all the more amazed that I have any backers at all. But the thing about it is when you get it, I believe that you're going to hold it and be surprised and say this book should have been $50-$60 because it's really, really an incredible edition that we're doing. But
Yep.
because because I'm selling direct to people, I cut out a lot of expense, a lot of the money that gets eaten up for distribution and for selling wholesale to stores. And there's a lot of work that went into researching this model that I'm using, which is just saying, look, I don't need 1 million people to buy my book. I need 1,000 people who really care about it, care about what I'm doing. Maybe 2,000 people would be a dream, really. If I can
Mm-hmm.
get 2,000 people, that's it. I can make a living doing this stuff, and all they have to do is make that 2,000 people very happy and make sure that they're coming back for more later.
Yep.
And I think that's a great model. It's sort of going back to it's going back to like the 60s or 70s or 80s, really, where you're not just trying to just cast stuff out and just make things quickly. We want to make stuff that lasts and has profound impact in the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing. You're obviously extremely passionate about storytelling, and so you're pouring a lot of love in, and the fact that you're doing a lot of this after hours too is all the more impactful. That's something I remember from Insomniac when I was working on Dreamside, which is my other original story.
Mm-hmm.
To put that kind of passion in, you want to go all the way with it. You don't want to just have done great writing and then quickly get art in there to get it out, or quickly
Yeah.
print a cheap edition so you can offer to people cheap. I think people actually, I would rather pay $30 for a higher quality book than have the option to get a $10 piece of junk.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, I mean it's the reason why I don't think too many people buy, books like Mouse Guard digitally. Like I'm sure some people do, and I'm sure some people, they enjoy it. But for me, like to have the physical, crafted, like you said, like heirloom thing in your hands is a lot different.
It is.
Yeah.
If you want evidence of that, in fact, the publisher that a friend of mine who's a publisher told
Mhm.
me that digital presence of books increases the sale of physical books of
Mhm.
the same title.
Yeah.
And so you by releasing a digital version, you tend to sell more physical books. And I think what happens is people read it digitally and they
Mhm.
decide, oh, I like this book. Now I need to buy it. And think,
Yeah.
oh, wait a minute, I did buy it, but no, I didn't.
Yeah, I think you get the same thing. You're starting to see companies do that with games now too. You're starting to see companies like Limited Run come out with collector's editions of games that are primarily digital. They have, like the Hollow Knight collector's edition or the Dust on Elysian Tale collector's edition. Indie Box did the same thing. Like, they'd release like a boxed copy of a game that, you
Uh,
know, normally didn't have a physical release.
that was limited run right there with Dust.
This is Indie Box, and this is the limited run version of Salt and Sanctuary, which you can get on a variety of systems now.
Very
Um, yeah, they're slick, and these games are digitally released games. They don't necessarily have physical box copies.
well.
Uh,
Limited run. I talked about them recently. They have they found a middle ground because games used to they have to be big enough to warrant a large run, or they were digital only. Limited run, but the whole thing about limited run is, look, you can get these games digitally, so there is definitely a market out there for people who want to get these high end editions that they can keep and hang on to.
yeah, the heirloom editions of these games. It's
Mhm.
pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't want to spoil anything that I'm working on, but I will say that I'm working on something that is going to potentially match a little bit about what they're doing in the sense that I can produce things a little bit more quickly, let's say, in terms
Mm,
of these books without losing the quality, and also potentially make books that are maybe they have the same quality but they're a little less expensive as well.
interesting.
So yeah, we'll talk more about that as things move along. But uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's caused me to just go on a spree to connect with all these studios. Of course, I talk to people a lot about the challenges that I face periodically with this stuff. I mean, I quit Insomniac and when I was maybe about 2 years into after hours work on just trying to figure out how to make a book, right? And
Hmm.
I got it to the point where I said, you know what, in order to finish this book the right way, I need to focus on it full time. And I thought, I'm going to give it a go. I was at the right age and everything. I thought I'll try, but it's really been about 5 years since I quit my job.
Hmm.
And when I tried and tried and tried for years to get a social media following during the Dreamside days, I said, you know what, I want to do the same thing, but I've got to change a few things. So we'll figure out what the priorities are, what I need, what I want to keep, what I'm willing to give up, what I'm willing to sacrifice here, and that led me ultimately to working on the game adaptations, which now is an absolute blast. I'm having a lot of fun, but I'm so used to things not working out. That I'll cast
Yeah.
like at any given maybe I'll reach out to 100 people a month about some sort of a connection,
Hmm.
something that I'm trying to do professionally. And like one thing will sometimes work where it'll lead into another conversation out of like the 100. So I'm so used to nothing working out that
Hmm.
post Yuka campaign, I started reaching out to studios, but now I started getting more yeses than I expected. And then I had to actually stop and pull back because I realized, oh, now there's too much to do.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I can't thank backers enough for because you understand that when you and Alex, you're in this list, when you back a campaign like this that is the first effort in a studio that is founded on ambition that wants to grow,
Hmm.
you're not just buying that particular book or that product. You really are kickstarting the company and making it possible for it to grow. And so I am going to pour all of that love back into every project that I do, and it's going
Hmm.
to come back to you 20 fold. I mean, we're going to have so many cool adaptations, and there's so much stuff in the works. And it's just really cool to get to connect with people like you who are on sort of the other side of game development, but are also producing comics and have experience with making books like this. And I'm just very excited to get a chance to connect with people and actually have it turn into things for a change. So that's very nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly exciting to see. I mean, I was a Cracklestone backer. I also backed the original Yooka-Laylee project that Platonic did,
Oh, nice.
and it's cool to, and it does sort of harken back to that Nintendo Power extended universe thing that they were doing back in the day. This idea that there were untold stories in these IPs that existed, and all you had to do was sort of find the right creator, find the right voice, and tell that story. Nowadays you see a lot of IP that translates into comics. Things like Mass Effect, usually very story heavy kind of games. Like Dark Horse will pick up the IP for Dragon Age or something and do a comic series. And that's cool. That's really neat. But you don't really see that sort of like whimsical, lighthearted stuff that Nintendo was doing in the early days. And Yuka and the Cracklestone definitely fits that bill for me. It is a gorgeous looking comic. And even in the earliest, Kickstarter pitch sort of steps, I knew that it was going to be great, because really, if you've got a professional artist who can show you a couple of pages, that's the pitch. That is like, the book is going to look like this, and it's either going to look like this or it's going to look better than this, because over time I will figure this out.
Because I'm a neurotic artist and I'm going to redo things.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And because it's going to be a full graphic novel that you release at once, you can go back and George Lucas it as much as you want before it releases, and that's great. You can totally do that.
You have been great about your timeline, which is an unexpected thing for a lot of Kickstarters. The platform has a reputation. One of the things that I talked to Platonic about when we first were beginning was that I wanted to do a crowdfund, which at first they did not like. And I explained the reasons behind it, and they eventually warmed up to the idea, but I don't think they were ever really thrilled with it, because the Kickstarter is, it has a reputation, and crowdfunding in general has a reputation.
Yep.
I think, and I'm completely thankful to them for taking that chance, because they really were putting their own reputation at risk in a way.
Yeah.
And so, that's incredible, and I'm always gonna love them forever because of that. The first studio that gave me a chance with this stuff, but the problem with a lot of Kickstarters is that I think people, and I guess this is the nature of Kickstarter to a point, is a lot of Kickstarters start a little too close to the beginning, and so you get that long development period and the hiccups that can occur. Like I say with Yuka, I had scheduled about 10 to 12 months to do Yuka, and in total it will be probably a little over 2.5 years of actual development time on Cracklestone. And that's a long time to do a comic in general, but it would have really been a problem if I told backers, oh, it's going to take a year, and then it's 2.5 years later,
right,
year and a half late.
Hey, it wouldn't be the worst thing that's happened on Kickstarter by any stretch of the imagination.
That's true, but I hate that that's the. I kind of feel like if we have responsible campaigns like yours and what I'm trying to do, then maybe we can help the reputation of Kickstarter a little bit. It just kind of, I think it had to kind of come into its own, and have people understand that you really do have the freedom to screw up with Kickstarter. There aren't really a lot of rules there.
No, certainly not.
There really aren't. And so, but when someone puts their money into something, it's like when you have a customer, it's like that's especially with flaky artists like me, you have to really take that very, very seriously and understand that, look, I am not going to, I mean, I'm like Yuka, it might be a little late, but it's not going to be later. It's going to be in the summer,
Right.
But if it is late, it's like, okay, it's going to be because I'm polishing up the pages just a little bit more, just bring it up to that level. And but at the same time, it's like, I don't want to have the situation where I'm delivering a year late or 2 years late. So it's just good. It's good to see. That's another thing that I commend you on, is your ability to deliver in a good time frame. Honest.
Yeah, I mean, we'd sort of been there before. We knew that it takes an inordinate period of time, an inordinately long period of time to like print the books in China and then have them shipped overseas. We also ran into the Chinese New Year, which made things more problematic to some degree. But we the book was pretty much done. I think the only thing that we changed, aside from the new cover and some of the new front matter, was the extras section. In the original version of the book, the extras section was kind of it broke the fourth wall a lot. It was very much like special features on a DVD, where it's like me and Rachel talking about, like, in this scene we did this, and in this scene we did this, and then we realized that garnering some feedback, like, you do such a good job of like building this world up, your extras should probably also stay in the fiction. And so we changed the extras around to be in the fiction of the book. So it's like our in-universe personas are going over the historical accuracy of various things, and it was an interesting sort of take on it. But like, to redo that was time. To add the new covers was time. To do the art for things like the pins, we had those enamel pins. We had to tweak the bookmark stuff, and we had the book plate art, and that's all on Rachel. Really, like, Rachel basically just made all this new art, and we didn't launch the Kickstarter until we had most of it. That was one of the things that we wanted to make sure of. We didn't want to have our pitch be like artist's representation of something like this. We wanted to know what the actual thing was going to look like, so that was pretty important. And I was really, like, you went the extra mile in yours, because like, for your enamel pin, you added like a little 3D effect to it, and you added like the little sheen, so like it will definitively look like this. And ours was just like the art for the pin.
Yeah. Well, that's, yeah. And of course that's still a concept. It just hopefully is one that looks like the final.
It's gonna look exactly like that piece of art that you did.
I'm hoping it will. That's pretty much what it was. It's a soft enamel pin, so it has the little recessed areas.
Right. Yeah, those are, yeah. So ours are the same way.
That pin's going to be neat. It's a 2-inch pin, so it's a sizable pin. I think it has two little connect. Oh, and I'm planning to use anyway. I gotta get backers to give feedback on this, but I'm planning to use magnetic clasps.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because there are a few reasons for it. Yeah, there's always a few reasons with Kickstarter, but the magnetic clasp, I think, is the only negative of a magnetic clasp is that it's a little easier to lose the pin, but for it to drop up. But the magnets are so strong. But every other element is an advantage. You have to poke through anything. If you have a strong enough magnet, you have to worry about it coming apart. You can put it on like, if you want to put it on a bag or something, you're not gonna have to poke through the canvas, that sort of thing. And you can also use it on a surface that would basically, you can magnetize it, put it in your fridge or that sort of thing. It also, and this is a huge advantage, is that it ships flat. So it's a much flatter pin. So I'm dealing with international backers. I had a pretty strong international backing. In fact, I think about 42%.
Oh, wow.
And counting is international. Yeah, so
that's awesome.
Well, it's awesome to have that kind of support. But it's a risk because you have the shipping expense. Fortunately, I went through and figured out a good international shipping plan, because I am dual warehousing. So we're fulfilling orders that are international from the UK. But the pin adds like a really unique challenge, because every other item that I have is flat or is fabric, like with a map, which is fine. That like serves as padding almost in the package. But with the pin, if you get that sharp little thing in there, even though it's got a cap on it, it's still, you can't stack the packages, without it digging into the other elements. You almost need like a separate compartment for the pin. So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about in terms of the packaging. I'm thinking with the magnetic clasp, you can stick that in there and not have it cause problems for your packaging.
That's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Yeah, I'll have to look into that maybe.
Yeah, and for your future projects, it's, I don't know if you're planning to stay with the same production methodology, but if it would be really interesting to kind of share some information about what we're doing And especially when it comes to fulfillment, because one of the problems, and this is something that Doug ran into with Bigfoot Bill, I know, is the challenge of international backing. He like many campaigns did not really. I don't think he collected nearly enough money for international shipping.
Yeah.
So I actually charge like down to the dollar accurate shipping, which surprised a lot of people. I think it is expensive, but it is just expensive. And I thought, look, it adds too many variables when you don't accurately collect shipping, because you don't know how many people from Australia, for example, are going to order your book from the
Right.
States. And for me to ship my book, like if I were to ship one of the collector's packs that I have to Australia, you're looking at probably about a $45 shipping cost for the
Hmm.
States. But I charge, I think, maybe $27 or $28, because it's like $21 postage from UK to Australia for that package. And then I have like an additional like $5 or $6 fulfillment fee and freight to UK.
Hmm.
Right. So it's like the total shipping was like 28, 27, and it was a lot cheaper than the American option, even with the freight to UK, the freight to the warehouse, the packing of within that warehouse, and the shipping out, the postage label being affixed to the package. All of that is cheaper
Hmm.
than for me to go to my local post office and ship to Australia.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one of the benefits of Make That Thing. They had the experience of knowing exactly how much it would cost to ship like a media mail package from one location to any number of countries outside the US. If it had pins and we couldn't ship it through media mail, how much extra that would drive up the price.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole like spreadsheet that they built for us. It was one of the first things that they did after we locked down our rewards, figuring out exactly how much shipping would cost for all these different international markets. And it was pretty cool. They were able to figure it out across every tier, and that saved us a lot of trouble. So that and they've even got like, I have like the box over there that they sent their stuff in, but it's like a branded Make That Thing box, and it's got just enough space for like all the stuff that we need, and it was awesome.
Yeah. Can you ship, like, I haven't really gotten a super clear answer on this with media mail. Can you ship other paper products in there? Like if you have a bookmark, or is that something that is not allowed? Because it really seems to be very strict about like, oh, you can only have the book in there for media
Yeah,
mail.
I'm not entirely sure. I think that it's as long as it's a paper product, it's okay. But I could be wrong with that. I mean, I know at the very least, like when we were talking about the pins and stuff, it's like no, like like if it's not,
Definitely not the pen, yeah.
definitely not the pins.
It has metal in
Um,
there, you're gonna have trouble.
Right. But I think with paper products, it was okay. Obviously I wasn't the one who was preparing the packages, so I'm not 100% sure. But I do know that, the idea was to get it as flat as possible and to have as many paper products as possible,
Mhm.
and to have things that you could like slip into the book. So,
Right. Yeah, if you have
all of
yeah, because
exactly, like the bookmark and all of our prints fit perfectly inside the
right.
book.
Yeah, with Yuka, this is something kind of fun. So with your square format, I had plans to do a larger. It was going to be a Dreamside was always planned to be a magazine ratio and size. So 8.5
Mhm.
by 11, basically a piece of paper, which is slightly oversized for a graphic novel. Uh,
Yeah.
and I remember I went to Comic Con this past year. I was in San Diego, and a prominent comic retailer came up to me and was asking about Dreamside because I had some of the art out. And I said, I'm going to print it as a book. And he said, what format? And I said, oh, at 8.5 by 11. And I didn't finish saying 11 before he started shaking his head. He's like, nope, no, you're not. I said, oh, okay. Guess I'm not going to do that. And
Mm,
why not? Because I really do love oversized books. Like this Bigfoot Bill one this is like 9 by 12. It's really,
yeah, it's pretty big.
which is a great read. Like you open it up, it just kind of overwhelms you, and it's really neat. But he said the problem with anything over 8 by 10 is kids, if you have a book for kids, they do not pick it up if it's bigger than 8 by 10. They just won't pick it up off the shelf.
Yep.
So if you have your book on display, it's like it's got to be 8 by 10 or smaller. So for Yuka, I'm doing 7.25 by 9.5.
Hmm.
So it's a little bigger than sort of like a kid's graphic novel. It's not like the 6 by 9 that you get with Scholastic when they do kids books. It's bigger than that, and it's also it's a wider ratio. It's pretty much like a larger manga book,
Mhm.
in terms of like the manga ratio.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting about the format, about how to kind of shrink it down. But the benefit of shrinking it down is that my book it's heavy. It's a surprisingly heavy book. It's got a 100-pound paper in it, uh,
Hmm.
and it has a reinforced binding. It's big, thick cover stock and all that. But because of its reduced size, it's just under 2 pounds. Like it's
Yeah.
very close to 2 pounds.
Hmm.
And when you hit 2 pounds, your shipping costs go off the charts, especially with international.
Right.
So I had to figure out how to kind of keep the book under 2 pounds, and fortunately, we were able to make that happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the 8x8 form factor has been fantastic. I mean, not only is it easy to hold in the hand, I think the problem with bigger books that you get is that you sort of lean a little bit too much into that heirloom quality impression. Is that like, oh, that's way too big?
You,
Like,
you don't want to pick it up and read it.
yeah, yeah, it's almost like you're scared to pick it up because it's so big. And I absolutely love those kinds of books. Like I have books over here that are so big that to put them in my bookshelf, I have to flip them over onto their side and put them in, on the back just because they're so big.
I've got that oversized Zelda Breath of the Wild guide,
Ooh,
which
yeah,
is it's an enormous book. It's so heavy.
yeah. I actually have one of actually I think I've got yeah, so there's a mouse guard black and white edition that David put out that is like the actual size. The book is the size of the paper that he works on, and I don't actually know what it is, but it's larger than the standard 8x8 that he normally does. And it is a massive, heavy, crazy thing with like it's got these vellum inserts for weather effects and stuff on it, and it's like mind-blowingly gorgeous, but it's big and it doesn't fit into a conventional like doesn't fit into my little bookshelf here. But with these little ones, they not only fit on a normal bookshelf, but because they're kind of stubby, they they look different
They
on
pop
on the
out. Yeah,
shelf. They
yeah.
pop out, which is hugely valuable if you're thinking of like putting it with other books or like getting it in a store or something like that. So that's a
Mhm.
little benefit to that too.
So yeah, yeah, not to cannibalize the attention back on Yuka, but just because you brought that up about so the book itself, we're going to be doing something kind of similar to what you did with the stamping, but we're doing something that's so insane. I literally like the printer did not know what I was talking about. In
Uh-huh.
fact, one of the reasons that I did the graphics that were in the Kickstarter that have the animation to kind of show that was actually for the printer originally, so I could demonstrate. I had to
Hmm.
actually make a 3D model to try and show them what I was focused on. So basically, the way it works is you have like I'm just going to use this as an example because I have it here. But with Yuka, we're going to be doing what's called a sculptural deboss,
Hmm.
and it is oh my god, it looks like a relief sculpture, so it's actually sculpted in 3D. Like
Uh-huh.
they use like it's not Maya, but like something like that would actually give a 3D model, and then they cut that out, they etch that out of a brass die.
Hmm.
And then, but the thing is, the problem with embossing, and this is something that you can see on this book. Actually, you're not really going to be able to see it, but the point is that embossing comes out, debossing goes in, right? Problem with embossing, especially if you use foil, is that the element will pop out, right? It kind of sticks out, and if you put it on the shelf or you're too rough with it,
A little cut, yeah.
yeah, it can cause damage to the foil. So what we're actually doing with Yucca is the border around the perimeter is
Uh-huh.
the furthest part out, and,
Ew.
and then the,
Oh
the
yeah.
the relief. What it actually is the material of the cover is this kind of spongy, soft material until it's compressed, and then
Hmm.
it gets compressed into an extremely dense material as it's pushed in by the brass die. I'm going to go in there with a camera because this is going to be the coolest process. But they're going to stamp it in, and then you're going to see it's like a relief sculpture on the front where yooka-laylee will pop out, and we got all the little flowers in the bottom. They're going to pop out, and everywhere that is popped out
Yeah.
is you're going to have a textural feel of the logo, and just like a 3D sculpt of the logo is there, and then everywhere that's popped out is transparent holographic foil put
Mm.
stamped on there, and then the whole thing is laminated so that there's no chance of any of it scraping off anyway. But when you put it on your shelf, it's almost like it's got a window to protect everything on the cover. So all of the elements, and then on the side, we have stamping as well. So we're going to have foil and everything. So no matter how it's displayed, because we did think a little bit about this in terms of, okay, if it's in a bookstore, it's either going to be displayed with its spine out or it's going to be front facing. And I
Mhm.
thought, okay, if I make the book so attractive that you'll want to display it on the shelf because it's going to have this rainbow holographic effect on it with this, like, it just, you won't believe it's a book. It's like, oh, what is this weird framed relief sculpture? It's like, oh, it's actually a book I can open up. So people want to front face it, I'm hoping. And if they display, even if they display it with a spine out, it still has that foil stamp and emboss on there on the side as well. So it's expensive, but to do a relief that big because it's got to cover the entire front cover, and then we of course have the backer seal on the back for the backer edition. So all of that has to be produced custom, and it's expensive, but I'm hoping I can reuse that backer seal for future books.
In my professional opinion, that sounds nice.
Yeah, I was gonna hope I was hoping you would come up with a more eloquent word.
That was great. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll let you think on it for a while. Give
Yeah.
me something good. But yeah,
I was gonna say exorbitant, but
ooh,
like it is. I mean, it is, but that describes more of the quantity than the quality, if you know what I mean.
right,
Uh,
right,
you
right.
know, it is. It is. I mean, it sounds great. I was when you were talking about that spongy material. I'm trying to remember. There's a book that I have floating around somewhere over there that does have that sort of spongy material on the front, and I absolutely love it. It feels like a tome. It feels like something you dig up at an old bookshop, and
Right, yeah. Well,
it's very cool.
it starts spongy and then it's compressed into like the tight, so
Mhm,
it'll ultimately it'll have the solid feel, but
mhm,
it has to be it's a porous material at the
mhm.
start that just gets pushed in because
Yeah.
it's the only way to do it. Because what you can do with normally what happens is if you have embossing, it's usually like if you have that kind of sculptural emboss, it's done on a dust jacket,
Mhm,
and then with the cover, you might have some embossing, but usually it's not very detailed on the hardcover itself because what they do with the dust jacket is they have to push through the opposite side. So they have a mother and a father. They have a male and female die, and they compress together and then they push through, right? So
right,
kind of like how you do it on a business card or a piece of paper. Any
right.
sort of embossing like that is done that way. But
Mhm,
you can't do that on a the actual hardcover itself without having to compress in, or you can do it on the wrap that goes around the cover. But for our case with the relief sculpture, they have to do it into the cover itself. So
right.
it's gonna be nuts.
Yeah. No, it sounds cool.
They've never done it before the way that we're doing it. So we're gonna I'm a little worried about it, but we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be cool. Uh, that'll be cool. I'm excited to see it. It's gonna
Right, right. So
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, we're coming up to about an hour and a half. Is there
Oh,
anything that you
man.
think we should cover before we sign off?
I'm asking the hard questions here. You've been drawing Yuka for a really long time. Is he wearing like a suit or something? Is that like a leotard he's wearing? I don't know. That character design's baffling to me. I
He
don't know
does
what's
have
going on.
he has a pair of pants. Now I here's the funny part. Now, one of the most entertaining experiences for me during this process has been communicating with the team at Platonic because they have that old kind of rare humor at like Rare the company.
Yes.
And it's they're much funnier people than me. And so
Mhm.
it's a blast to talk to them because they keep me on my toes, and they always have something smart to say about everything, and I just can't keep up with them, and I can't even tell you some of the things that they've told me. Just they're so ridiculous and on and off the wall. I'll contact them with a serious question, and they'll say,
Mhm.
hey, I've got this page and I've got this dilemma that I'm, how does this work with the game or whatever, and like they'll come back with just a total nonsense answer. And then I'll ask them, "But all right, but seriously now," and then they just won't respond to me, and I'll have to figure it out. So
Yeah.
it's a hilarious experience. So, but part of that experience has been to learn about British colloquial
Mm.
terms because it's really not something that that I knew all that much about. I mean, other than watching Mr. Bean, who doesn't really say anything, and
Right.
the occasional episode of Keeping Up Appearances, which my dad loved to death, with Miss Bouquet. And so one thing I learned throughout the course of Yuka's development is that pants refer to underwear in,
Mm.
in England,
Mm.
whereas trousers refer to your pants, as we would call them here in the States.
Yes.
So I was always talking about just any time that would come up the subject of clothing for any particular character, and I would talk about pants, and it was always a source of confusion as to why I was only drawing them in their undies. But yeah, Yuka just he's a commando all the way. He does have his nice little pair of trunks that he wears. If you reach a certain point in the game, you can unlock that. But he is completely naked, which
Mm.
in fact all of them are really naked. That is a running joke in the book as well. They have a character called Rupert the Pantless,
Ah.
and he is and we had a tattoo contest on
Mhm.
Twitter. So he has a tattoo on his butt.
Oh man.
Name of the Twitter winner. But the joke is that he's pantless, but everyone makes fun of him. But of course, everybody's naked.
Right. Exactly.
Let's see, Doctor Puz, I think, is the only one. Oh, and Capital B is dressed.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, Doctor Puz is a weird kind of
Comics are weird. Like in general, this is weird. This is all weird.
This is weird, and this is the kind of stuff that I have to think about every day. And you know what's funny about it is not the content itself, it's the fact that this stuff stresses me out too. Like I have to get it right, but it's the most ridiculous things. Like how many suckers do I draw on Dr. Puzz's tentacle thing?
Mm. Mhm.
Oh, how many did I draw on the previous page? Oh, I got to load up the page and they have to count the suckers and
Sucker consistency, like people, that's how these things get rated in the long term. It's how you enter the public consciousness is sucker consistency. If you get it wrong, you're an industry pariah and you don't get nominated for Harvey Awards.
I figured somebody will mention it at some point. There will be some backer who will say, "That's it. This book's going back. This is trash. You did not get sucker consistency."
Excuse me. On page 36, there are 42 suckers. 42.
The ultimate humor here would be if it's you who does this to me.
Oh yeah. Well, believe me, now you've set it up, and I have to, serve a big softball over the plate. I have to hit it.
You got to deliver.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna be doing that. I'm like, yeah. So I'll be that person. Like,
right.
The feather in this cap on page 12 clearly has red, yellow, red, red, yellow, but on the next page it's red, yellow, red, yellow, red, red.
Yeah, that was a nightmare for 3 days for me. Actually, I had because they have the quills, right? So the quills in the game that are a collectible. Right. So there's a lot of references to the game in there, obviously. And the quills were a thing. Like, how do I translate the quills, which are actually very detailed and rendered in the game, but I'm trying to match them stylistically. And so I used a specific series of colors, but I kept changing those colors page by page. And so I'd have to go back to each page and say, okay, now I have the latest colors. So I go back and change, but I would do it too quickly. So I would change them again and have to go back and change the feather, the quill color. That is a neuroses right there. I think
consistency across the pages, like even, it's even worse for something like Western Deep, where like we miss something and then it goes live and then, we post it and everyone's like, this character has armor here, but they didn't in the previous page. Like,
I can't do it. I could not do a webcomic. It would be impossible for me. I have to get through and, because I rough things out, I think like a storyboard artist, right? So I need to see things all the way through to completion. And then even when, okay, maybe it's laid out perfectly and I know exactly what it's going to be, I'm still going to make changes as I go. That would drive me insane if I couldn't go back through and edit the first page at any given time.
Well, we still do it. We just, we'll go back and we'll change it, and someone might notice it. Some people don't. But this, and when we gear up for like a hardcover release, for example, for like Volume 1, anything that we sort of said like, yeah, we'll go back and we'll change it later. That was when we had to go back and change it. because it's going to be immortalized in physical form. You need to make sure that you're getting it right, because you can't go back and change it again.
No,
So
you certainly cannot. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we just about call it here? And I want to remind everybody of two things that you should go do right now. One is you should definitely support Beyond the Western Deep and help Alex get through the remaining books that they have. I don't know how many you have left, but I know you're getting low. So get them now because of that whole conundrum of doing print runs. It's not cheap. So this is a great opportunity to support an indie artist, and it's very, very cool because there's going to be more. And you want to get it. You want to get the first one now, so you have the full collection.
Oh, yeah.
And the second thing, of course, I will shamelessly plug Yooka-Laylee and the Crackle Stone, which is also available on the Backer Kit store.
What we can do, you don't have to shamelessly plug it. I will say, hey, you there? You look like a discerning comic book person.
Who me?
Yeah, you right there. You seem like you'd be interested in this Yooka-Laylee and the Cracklestone graphic novel, which I should point out you can get right now by following that link right there in the stream chat. And if you do that, you can actually order the book and get it when it's completed. When?
This summer.
Summer, yeah. So
yes. We'll say July. July is the expected delivery date. The cool thing is we're printing in the States, and so we only have about a 2-week printing period. And I'm really excited because I'm planning to go down to Nashville and actually film the production process and make an emotional video compilation showing the finality of it all pieced together. I tried that when we were going to print. At one point, we were talking to a studio in Hong Kong that does printing, and they laughed at me. I think they laughed at me. But they did offer to take a camera around and take pictures for me, so that was very nice. But I thought, you know what, a bit of a control freak. I kind of want to go around and take those shots myself. So yeah, make sure to follow the link and support Beyond the Western Deep and show Alex some love. It's a great story, and you can of course read it as well at Beyond. It is westerndeep.net.
It is westerndeep.net. Or westerndeep.com if you can't remember westerndeep.net or westerndeep.com just in general. We got them both. So yeah, Western Deep, whatever.
It's taken over the internets. So yeah. Western Deep, read it and love it and share it and let people know that you can find this fantastic new book, because we want to see a lot more from Alex and from Rachel as well. And maybe we can do one of these with her involved.
Yeah, that would be great. I will ask her and we'll figure something out. It'll be fun.
That would be a lot of fun. All right. Well, Alex, this is a ton of fun. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight and talking. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. And you realize that other people out there are sharing similar experiences and it's amazing how much help you get during these live streams, just having these conversations. So thank you for joining me. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And this has been great.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks for the invite. This was a ton of fun. And we'll do this again sometime.
Definitely. All right. Again, thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.